So hello. It's been quite a while since I've done one of these streams. I think I've been gone for almost a month now, actually. But I decided that I really had to get back in the habit of live streaming at least once every month because a few days ago I was invited on Friended's live stream, and I enjoyed the experience so much that I really thought, okay, it doesn't matter that I don't have a plan. It doesn't matter that my life is completely in flux. I'm in the middle of a move. I should just live stream. This is a good exercise. It helps build the community. We might talk about that, but it's an opportunity to just talk about random things, clear thoughts, and just see what people are up to online. Today I kind of wanted to talk about, I don't know, I guess the state of the discourse, just how I'm thinking about things generally, and to answer people's questions. I feel that in a lot of ways, right-wing YouTube has been incredibly quiet recently. More than just the recent bannings. I think people are searching for something to talk about, searching for some new direction to go in, but nothing's really forthcoming. So I wanted to talk about a few things and just ramble. As usual, I don't really have an official start for these less formal streams. I did have a slight talk that I had prepared about something I saw on a Substack. It wasn't Curtis Yarvin's Substack, but it was a Substack that had recently interviewed Yarvin. Perhaps that was how I originally discovered it. But he talked about the four horsemen of the cultural apocalypse. And I thought the juxtaposition was quite good. I don't know. It was kind of crude, but it definitely had some impact on me, because I remember seeing that and going, yeah, that's true. Maybe I'll just start in on that. So, the four horsemen of the cultural apocalypse. And actually, I'm going to kind of see if I can remember who actually said this. This was Nicola Soldo. He said this on his Substack. He said the four horsemen of the cultural apocalypse were fake, gay, cringe, and retarded. So I remember back in high school that the terms fake and gay were something that we tossed around at anything that was stupid. And of course, no, we were 13, 14. I think I heard that expression kicked around even casually when I was 16 or 17. Although by that time in my life, I'd kind of fallen in with a more progressive crowd. And even back then, calling things gay in a pejorative sense, even if you didn't literally mean homosexual, that was sort of a taboo. You know, that was uncouth. But I remember hearing fake and gay. And it meant a certain kind of thing. It meant something that was unreliable, something that was just not cool generally, that was stupid. And I don't know, I didn't really think very much of it. But now when you see, I guess we're no longer in the holy month of Pride, but I guess it always feels like July, even following June, is still the holy Ramadan of the LGBT movement. Everything seems fake and gay. Everything seems like it's unworthy of itself. And so when I saw this juxtaposition of fake, gay, cringe, and retarded, I kind of put some thought into it. These do seem to be sort of like the cultural afflictions of our time. So, I guess without putting too fine a point on it, where should I start? Maybe I'll start with another story. So, much later in my life, this is, I think, towards the end of my progressivism phase, right when I was rediscovering religion, right when I was rediscovering conservatism, and yeah, it was the cringe variety. This was the Ben Shapiro conservatism, so this wasn't that long ago. Right. But I was living in Portland, Oregon, I think at the time, and I had this fascination with the steampunk community, whatever the hell that was. It never was a community. Steampunk was this idea. It was sort of this new cultural fad that was really, I think it really reached its heights in the, probably someone will tell me I'm wrong about this, but for myself, the steampunk fad reached its height around 2010 to 2014. So it was sort of like on the cusp of the hollow decade, right before the Great Awakening happened. This was the steampunk thing, and it was really big in hipster circles. And as myself, I was all into folk music. I was all into old things. I was all into, the wisdom of the past. Oh, what can we learn from Catholicism? What can we learn from religion? What can we learn from the Victorians? I love Victorian literature. Oh, this is so interesting. And what if steampunk is the path, I should say, by which the old becomes new, by which old ideas recirculate and become revivified with youth culture. This is very exciting. Of course, just like anime, and actually very much like anime, since it's more or less the same crowd that likes steampunk as liked anime. Luckily, steampunk never actually became autonomous, but that's neither here nor there. But very much like anime, the crowd that was doing steampunk was not interested in the past. They were interested in the aesthetics of the past. They were interested in copying the Victorian uniforms. Still, I held out hope. I thought, maybe something is actually going to happen here. And then you realize that there is no serious steampunk literature. There was serious cyberpunk literature. There were neuromancers, there was snow crashes, and it sort of made sense that this would be incorporated into a certain kind of youth culture. But for steampunk, that was never really a thing. There was no deep depth to this community. It was totally hollow. It was totally, on the surface, a visual affectation. But I still held up hope, and there were, every now and again, there was a good novel. I think there was a young adult novel called Bone Shaker that took place in a hypothetical 19th century Seattle, which, this is an incredibly stupid book because it portrays 19th century Seattle as if it were an actual urban area, as opposed to any time before 1920, Seattle would have been a podunk little town. It wasn't even clear at that time that Seattle was going to be the primary city in Washington. Most people thought it was Tacoma. But at any rate, this was a passable young adult fiction book. And of course, there was Neil Gaiman, who's kind of like the image of like this Victorian type of hipsterish future that was still popular with the kids. So I kind of kept on my fascination with this, but my politics and my worldview were just not aligned with the rest of the people who were doing this. Then I think one day it all came into place. I saw this segment. It was on the BBC. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was what they used to call a human interest story, fluff, as we know it now. And the segment from the BBC was on this modern young guy who dressed like an Edwardian gentleman every day. That he just gone up and he dressed, in like the very, very formal coats and evening gowns and with all the affectations you could imagine. And he'd just go around this, work at his, useless office job. I can't remember if he had an office job or if he was in food services. That would have been even more ridiculous. He'd have to change out of his morning jacket to get into the McDonald's uniform. But at any rate, he was living the typical millennial lifestyle in London. And it was like, oh my God, he's so bucking the trend of modernity. And the note said, and he already has 20 marriage proposals. And it just dawned on you then. I mean, first of all, I guess sort of the transparent thing about this is that the guy was completely fruity. He had absolutely no kind of manly presence. It looked like you could push him over in a fight. He even kind of like did this weird grimace at the camera, even was on him. And he could never sit still and sit in his bespoken suits and clothes without kind of smirking and believing that his own image was ironic. Were any of the marriage proposals he was getting not ironic? Was anything about his entire life not ironic? The thing was fake from one end to the other. Victorian or Edwardian fashion is what it is, but this image was a complete simulacrum. It was completely fake. And I think that kind of made things kind of fall in line for me. I began seeing this everywhere. People were sort of fascinated with the exterior opinion of things. And they were not only couldn't they live up to the exterior opinion of them, they wanted to essentially wear the skin of the thing and also disavow the original substance of what it represented. Victorian and Edwardian costumes represented a society that had a certain number of opinions about things. Very prominently marriage, right? Did this person actually believe in those opinions of propriety and sexual comportment? Not only, I could tell even from his disposition, not only did he not believe in those things out of laziness, he probably explicitly denounced them. So, in this image of this Edwardian man living in modern times, it is simply the skin of the old thing, revivified so that it can condemn what was real about the older world. And somehow when I watched this guy, I knew he wasn't gay, but I kind of felt that everything that we used to say was gay back in high school applied to this man much more than it did anyone who had a homosexual sexual orientation. This was the image of something that was not right, not masculine. And this kind of got me thinking in this way. And I kind of combined this with Niccolo Soldo's Four Horsemen. We are living in the age of the fake, the gay, the cringe, and the retarded. I think the two things that really initiated this are the fake and the retarded. I feel really weird saying that. This is pretty simple. Human beings are not capable, for whatever reason, of living up to either the progressive vision of the future nor past aspirations for what the future would be. We're somehow behind the future. We're never catching up to it. We're completely incompetent at executing that kind of future that people wanted. I think that's sort of what gets you to the retarded dimension of things. You can see it even in the Biden administration. Everything doesn't seem to work very well. It's not good governments. It's not good administration. It's not a good, even from an efficiency point of view, use of human capital. The masters of the global order can't even seem to get out of each other's way to make global capitalism work, even though ostensibly they represent global capitalism. They can't fulfill their own promises. They can't even fulfill their own promises to produce the hollow and stale John Lennon imagined world. Therefore, inescapably, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you turn the picture, decline, retardation, whatever you want to call it, is a lived reality. It's a lived reality for progressives who want to move towards John Lennon's Imagine, because as much as they want to move towards the world of John Lennon's Imagine, they have to admit that the gods they put their faith in, be they the global NGOs of the centrist Democrats, or the straight-up classic Marxism or classic communism of the new Antifa revolutionaries, both of those gods are incapable of generating any kind of believable path towards the future that they want in John Lennon's Imagine. Moreover, and this is, I think, a more damning thing, it doesn't even feel like these leaders, these idols, these things that progressives want to put their faith in, it doesn't even seem like microcosmically they produce something of substance that's closer to that. And this sort of leads to the idea of retardation. That sounds so crude, but there's no honest narrative that can be spoken about politics that does not include a theory of decline. progressive, conservative, reactionary, or otherwise. We have to come to terms with the fact that some fundamental societal decline has happened. You can claim that declines only occurred in the last 5 years, but some decline has manifestly been observed. And anyone who denies that has to choose really the alternative, which is to be fake, to simply lie about it. Our current group of leaders originally pushed themselves forward. Pardon me. They originally pushed themselves forward as ruling because they were supremely competent individuals, because they were just the best of the best. They were the highest IQ people. They were the smartest people in the room. Everyone who goes to Davos for these meetings of NGOs, or who works for the World Economic Forum, or who's one of the many policy advisors that has Ivy League degrees, who talks to the people who are behind Biden, they all think that they're the best of the best. But they're not. Or at least if they're the best of the best in this age, the best we have isn't good enough to get people what they've been promised. And so they have to fake it. And the two ways I think they fake it, first of all, obviously, they fake it that they're more competent than they are, usually by promising more than they can deliver and promising bigger so that the new promises will wipe out the obvious deficiencies of their current incompetence. This is always the ever retreating promise of more and more wealth. It's kind of an analogy to printing more money. You can print more promises. The second way is sort of an identitarian fakeness. This is something that you can certainly see on display in communities of color. Basically, everything now is about representation. But is the representation accurate? These people who represent either communities of color or Christian communities to a large degree, they don't actually represent the communities that they're speaking for. They represent the interests of the elite class in the skin of the community that they supposedly represent. The interests that they have don't align with the interests of the population. The values that they obviously live out don't align with the values of the organizations that they originally set out to represent. I think this is an instinct that's very, very, that's a very, very common instinct among conservatives. People will know this they'll recognize this in people like David French, for instance. I mean, David French, every one of his columns is essentially an explanation about why the worst thing that could possibly happen is a right-wing movement that actually takes right-wing values seriously. And that the only ethical thing for right-wingers to do is to find out a way to most efficiently deliver a progressive temporal victory in order to demonstrate some long-term moral victory for a right wing that is really, in all honesty, disintegrating before our very eyes. You have to ask some questions about David French. He claims to be a conservative and a right-winger. Does he actually represent the interests of these communities? Does he represent the interests of the parents who feel like they're having their children educated improperly, perhaps even encouraged to undertake destructive, irreversible surgery or hormone replacement? Does he feel like a representative of interests of religious people who feel like they're being discriminated against, or who feel increasingly alienated by any media coming out of the mainstream? No, I mean, R.M. McIntyre put it very well, and I don't know if he was quoting someone when he said this the other day, but the right wing, as it exists in people like David French, or the conservative parties as they exist in people like David French, they exist to manage the right wing, not to actually represent it. They are fake. And, I don't want to speak for communities of color, but I'm sure that you'll see the same thing if you go to the Muslim community, if you go to the African American community. I mean, the people who show up representing Latinos or Latinas, Muslims, these are the people who compose the squad, or African Americans, I should include them too. these people are interested in identity politics largely when it comes down to representation at the elite levels. I don't want to partake in any notion of Marxist false consciousness, but there is no way that anybody in those communities is largely concerned with that kind of representation at that level. It's ridiculous. I don't know. I think that this is something that has largely been a weapon that the right has. I don't think the right is immune from the fakeness. Obviously, I mentioned David French, but this is something that dissidents have that is a weapon that's not largely, it's not largely used by us. I think this has been a problem for quite some time. Everyone knows that reactionaries, conservatives, right-wingers, and I'm not saying this for the first time at all. We all know that we're given into overusing the accusation of hypocrisy. What is the answer to hypocrisy from the crowd, either from BreadTube or from the mainstream Democratic Party or any kind of representation of the broad progressive movement? It's to laugh at the impotence of the accusation. That's the reaction. What we want to actually do, as opposed to accusing them of being hypocrites, is accuse them of being fakes. Is to say something like, I don't really believe you care about racism. I believe you care about economic empowerment of small communities, or even the survival of small communities. Or if you care about racism, it's in no way that anyone would have recognized it. You care about your own definition of racism and the way that it will benefit you. Because they're not hypocrites, they're fakes. I know I said this about Vosh before in a video that came out about 6 months ago. I know my content hasn't been very prolific in the last few months due to a variety of things. But we have to get out of the habit of calling them hypocrites and into the habit of questioning, do you actually believe that? Are you authentic? Because they're not authentic. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Now we'll talk about, perhaps another instance of fakeness occurring in institutions. So I think the other two horsemen of the cultural apocalypse that Nicolo mentions, cringe and gay, they kind of descend from fakeness in their own ways. Being cringe and being gay are both the left and right wing methods of coping with being a fake. So when we say gay, again, being a progressive, nothing will ever convince me. I always have an emotional instinct when I use that word as a pejorative. Oh my God, I'm being crude, I'm being anti-intellectual. But when you think about it, when people when we see something that, you have this instinct that it's gay or fake and gay or geek and fey, what are you actually reacting to? You're reacting to, obviously, it being fake, but you're reacting to a certain kind of fakeness that ancient Greeks would call effeminacy, or which I think we might more accurately term androgyny. Now, this seems to, and this is kind of fascinating, this seems to be sort of an MO of this entire content, but it's effeminacy and androgyny. What's wrong with them is that they attempt to dishonestly use or misuse boundary categories. So that is when, you essentially are using some kind of masculine energy in a feminine space, or a feminine energy in a masculine space, and so on and so forth. So you probably have had this experience, or some people probably have had this experience, when you're among a group of friends and you're doing some kind of sport, or you're doing some kind of activity among men, and someone's trying to passive aggressively undermine you in a really bitchy way. If you're among a healthy group of male friends, you can just insult the guy and they'll all laugh at him, and the bitchy passive aggressive tactics will just definitively not work because they'll be disempowered. But once you give into that, once you give into sort of the subtle relationship undermining, this is really more or less how women talk about relationships, more how women deal with relationships. That group of male friends is on the way out as any kind of thing that you can rely on. As a matter of fact, I'm fairly sure that men trade insults with each other in order to keep just this kind of passive aggressive little snitching behavior outside of a male group. Now, why do you have to do this in male groups? Obviously, women don't do this. If you go inside female groups, two things usually persist. Either there is very, very little conflict and there's a lot of camaraderie, if it's a healthy female group. But if it's contentious or if there's a struggle for hierarchy of any kind, it will occur very much in the same kind of passive aggressive mode, right? I should stop saying right after ending my sentence. It will occur in it will occur in a passive aggressive mode. I don't need to say this because this is something that movies like Mean Girls or any teen comedy from the early 2000s or late 90s is really, really apt to point out, right? Passive aggression, I just did it again. Passive aggressiveness is the mode of female aggression and status hierarchy climbing. The problem is when it crosses over. The reason why it's so deadly for masculine groups or for male groups is that male groups are supposed to be competency hierarchies in a much more explicit form than female groups are. If passive aggressiveness and sort of the bitchy mean girl attitudes can't enter into that space and actually pull weight in that space, they'll completely overwhelm the competency hierarchy and they'll introduce a dimension of politics to what otherwise should be an environment distinguished only by confidence and competence. Once passive aggression is allowed, competence and confidence are obscured by politics, by favoritism, and by an exchange of supplicancy, and that's really deadly to any kind of masculine community. Conversely, we should say that when you go into female communities, they're much more likely to use voice systems. This is something you notice is that female systems are much more democratic. When you're in a group of guys, I find that most of the time when you're deciding on something, usually the first person who puts in the preference is immediately agreed with, and you just go with it because it's pure consensus, or someone voices a strong preference, or sort of a designated decision maker makes the decision. Very rarely are inputs weighed in a democratic sense. From what I've observed of female communities, that's not the case at all. Here, it's a much more democratic process. It's much more political. It's much more a voice system than it is a choice system or a system of power or hierarchy. And that's fine for certain contexts. But what would happen, for instance, if you introduced females who were way, way, way more aggressive, who were essentially perfectly willing to shout down and not incorporate the other players in that group of people? The system only works in voice because it has a feminine quality. Just because the only reason why the competence hierarchy of the masculine system works is because it has a masculine quality. If you were to introduce masculine energy, you could dominate and exploit a feminine system. Just like if you used feminine energy, you can undermine and essentially evaporate a masculine power system. The net effect of allowing masculine energy to be used in feminine places or feminine energy to be used in masculine places is a complete destruction of both categories and the destruction of both of their core competencies and both of their gifts. Insofar as gay has a meaning outside of sexual orientation, which I believe it does, it is this use of one category to subvert the other. It's this use of boundary games to essentially play everyone towards the center and exploit the differences therein. When I see masculine politics in the modern age, I see an entirely feminized sphere. That's what creates the problems in these groups. That's what creates the issues. That's why nothing really can get done in a way, because it's constantly being held up. It's constantly subject to politics, which, I should say, politics has its place. Certainly not in any spaces that are trying to get things done in sort of a, for lack of a better word, a masculine way. And the same thing is true for feminine spaces. I've grown increasingly aware that this is the case with trans women. Trans women essentially are occupying the role of female when it comes to access to female spaces, when it comes to access to female forums, when it comes to access to female regulations, both legal and societal. If they then turn around and incorporate a lot of non-feminine aggression, what happens other than the complete explosion of that category, the destruction of that unit? When I look at a lot of the new trans streamers, I think of just that. But it's not, I guess it's not just necessarily a question of trans people. It's a question of everyone. It's a question of playing politics via victim group is another example of this. Being a victim is a feminine category in a sense. It's a category, at least historically, that men were highly discouraged from self-identifying as. To self-identify as a victim, as a man, was, I guess, acceptable in certain circumstances. But at the same time, nobody would allow you to essentially wield power from the role of a victim. That would be unheard of. That would defeat the entire purpose. To a certain extent, women could exert some political power through the role of the victim. The crying housewife asking for concessions, the church lady who says, "Think of the children." That was always a thing. That's not a new thing. That's not even a new thing in terms of modernity. If you were a king and your wife had something she was deeply passionate about, even 500 years ago, your playing the victim could wield a limited amount of political power. But that word limited is a key part of the frame. There was an understanding that power, the power politics wielded from the position of the victim, had to be limited in a quite radical way. And was limited in a quite radical way. If that's unleashed, then you essentially can play power politics as a victim. So you can get power, wield power, and then turn around and shield yourself from the consequences of that by playing victim. There was this article by Glenn Greenwald today. I follow his Substack, and it was talking about this, what apparently seems like a completely fictional, I'm looking at this article right now, a completely fictional plot, or maybe not completely fictional plot, but a plot that was almost entirely manufactured by the FBI, meaning that all of the people who were going through with the leadership to do this plot, I think it was a plot to kidnap the Michigan Governor Whitmire. Leading up to the election in 2020, there was this plot to kidnap this Michigan governor. This plot was completely orchestrated. Well, it was not completely orchestrated, but it was largely led. And yeah, I guess it was orchestrated predominantly through FBI agents who were working undercover. Most everyone else who's participating, at least according to Greenwald, was really just taken along and convinced into going along with this quote-unquote plan to kidnap the Michigan governor. So despite being completely fake and being monitored by the FBI and having no chance of success, of course the plan was immediately foiled. What immediately this allowed Biden and Governor Whitmer to do was to play up the fact that they were being victimized by right-wing terrorists. This then was a shield of any criticism they had for their handling of, well, in the case of Whitmer, probably the crime rates in her state and the general disorder of her state, or any questions about Joe Biden's policies when he entered office. It all became about the war against the evil Nazi menace. Okay, great. So they shield themselves from criticism. They wield power. They get into power. And then their first act, well, or at least one of Biden's first acts, is to massively increase the funding and focus the FBI has on creating just such fictional instances that they can react against. It's a closed loop. Victimization creates incompetent government. Incompetent government creates victimization. If you can be on both ends of this loop, you can wield infinite power. Being able to wield masculine energy, or in this case, masculine energy in a feminine space, or in this case, feminine energy in a masculine space, is more or less like being on both sides of a transaction. You both represent the interests of the debtor and the interests of the lender, and as such, you can cut any deal you want. There's no control whatsoever on what actually goes on. This really is the essence of being fake and gay in the modern world. It's the fact that we're dealing with an explosion of a category that was at one point useless to allow two real things to thrive. And the misapplication of one thing cancels out the other, and the misapplication of the other cancels the first one. After, what do you have? You have a complete mess of everything being confused with everything else. You neither have a genuinely female space, you neither have a genuine understanding of femininity and its utility, nor a genuine masculine space. At one point, people thought that you could literally have gay spaces or androgynous spaces, and this would be somehow contained, as if you could have the world of homosexual promiscuity or even the kind of attitude towards politics that gay women have, and that this wouldn't carry over into the straight community. I think everyone thought this. But it's not true. Because the real affliction of our age is this kind of spiritual disruption that we might call gayness. It's this disruption of categories by cross-mixing them. In some sense, the prominence and popularity of homosexuality might simply be a feature of this larger spiritual trend and not actually a result of it. I think, what is it, Douglas Murray always said, I'm homosexual, but I'm not queer. But to what extent did the West's growing queerness or gayness create homosexuality in a spiritual sense? Once the boundaries between masculine and feminine started to come down, how much did that actually create the phenomenon? All right, and I know I don't have slides from this, but this sort of brings me to the last of the four horsemen. The last of the four horsemen is cringe. Insofar as gay or queerness is the left wing's way of resolving the issue of being fake and retarded in the modern era, I think cringe is the way that the right wingers frequently fall into. For me, cringe is the mistake of trying to use an old and out of place meme in a way that's totally improper and out of context. Most of the time, unlike fake and gay, cringe is genuinely sincere. As a matter of fact, if cringe wasn't sincere, if cringe was fake and gay, it wouldn't be cringe. Cringe is boomers dressing up like Minutemen, going to a protest against the federal government, and then not really understanding what the Minutemen themselves would have made of that action. Cringe is every single conservative pundit chomping down on a cigar. Why is everyone always wonder that? Why is it always cigars? Why? I think it was Rush Limbaugh who did this. Was he the original cigar smoker? I feel like it was somebody else, but I feel like even Rush Limbaugh was copying Curtis LeMay. He was an Air Force. Is it an Air Force admiral, an Air Force general? He was an Air Force top brass in the Pacific Theater during World War II, and he always used to chomp these cigarettes and speak gruffly. He was a kind of a Patton figure. He worked under Admiral MacArthur, I believe. So this whole image of this the other person who I find completely cringe, who's a YouTuber, John Doyle, who's really trying to become the Goyim Ben Shapiro. He has this thing where he talks fast, and he has this thing called heck off commie, and the image of heck off commie is this 1950s guy who's really outraged at all the craziness that's going on in his community. And this guy is probably like 10 years younger than me. He couldn't be older than in his late 20s, or at least I don't think he is, because he looks really young. And he has this whole LARP where he's pretending to be like an angry 1950s, leave it to be their dad. He even has like his grandfather, or perhaps even great-grandfather's World War II rifle that killed Nazis on Omaha Beach hanging up behind him. This is totally cringe. I'm sure that the emotions he's feeling are sincere, but he's putting on airs that are obviously not real. He's telling you that his sincere emotions give him the ability to wield sincerely the power that these objects had in the time past. Essentially, it's the equivalent of using expired memes. The equivalent of using, I guess perhaps cringe is just a pretension. It's a pretension to wield power or to have a majesty that you don't really. I think New Atheism fell into this a little bit. For instance, there are repeated attempts to organize themselves like the Four Horsemen of New Atheism, or the Brights, as, was it Dawkins came up with that terminology for a little bit? That was cringe, because everyone understood that these errors they were taking on were completely fake. Their ideas were sincere, but their outward appearances were fake. I guess in some senses is almost the inversion of a lot of what goes on in the gay side of the equation. The gay has purity of form, but a fakeness of essence, and the cringe has a purity of essence, but a fakeness of form, and both of them are completely fake down to their core. Anyone who says that I'm one of the Four Horsemen, or I'm part. I think Dark Enlightenment was one of the original authors. He pointed this out as particular cringe. The Dark Enlightenment is a classic example of cringe from a community or from a set of ideas that I feel very close to. And the whole idea that something equivalent to the Enlightenment is happening again, but this time it's dark. Everyone can see that's not happening. I don't doubt that the people who are talking about these ideas are, in fact, they are engaged with an attack on the Enlightenment. And they are, in some sense, doing what figures in the Enlightenment did back in the day. They're questioning received norms. They're trying to completely deconstruct the framework and begin again. That's exactly what David Hume did. So in essence, there is sincerity. There is a pattern of doing the things of the Enlightenment. What makes it cringe is that everyone knows that when you say the Dark Enlightenment, you're trying to claim the form of something that wielded an incredible amount of power. But everyone knows that you are to the Enlightenment of the 18th century as, as a human sperm is to a sperm whale. The size is that differentially massive. And all you can really do when people do this is just cringe. And everything I see from the conservative movement, I can't even watch. I've been trying to. I mean, when we do this on YouTube, it's all about dialectics. And when I got off Twitter, it was actually harder to make videos because I didn't know what was immediately being talked about. So I ended up with a lot of videos that felt like I was saying something, but I didn't exactly know who I was talking to. So you always have to have some understanding of who you're talking to, which is why I try to watch people from the left. And it's why I try to watch people from the right. I can't watch these people anymore. I can't watch Ben Shapiro, obviously. I can't watch Steven Crowder. I can't watch Tim Pool. I certainly can't watch John Doyle. It's not because I can't I disagree with them so much is because they're so cringe. Even when they have a good point, they can't help dress it up in a way that overstates their ability to do anything about it. That overstates their role in the historical moment we're in. An honest assessment of the conservatives' role in the moment we're in is that they're documenters of the decline and death of an old world that has ceased to exist and which will no longer exist in the future. If they were honest about that, they would understand that they're preservers. Perhaps they are even dreamers and seekers of some new way. But they are not a counter-revolutionary movement on the verge of any kind of victory. And they don't realize that. And how... I mean, it's like Tim Pool saying that Trump was going to win against all odds. And not only win, he was going to have a 50-state victory. Presumably, because Tim Pool thought that the only people who voted Democrat are the people who actually think like progressives. Progressives are a minuscule part of this nation's population. But you're not fighting the true believer progressives in an election and pitting them against the true believer Republicans. You're fighting the coalition. You're fighting the demographics that vote for the left. And the demographics that vote for the left are huge, large, and ever increasing. And to not acknowledge this, like, you necessarily have to if you're going to be a moderate or... You know, I really like Friended, and I can watch Friended streams. I guess this is the thing. Friended saves himself from being cringe by just being so sincere, by just being so curious. I guess I shouldn't say sincere, because sincerity is a key component to being cringe. But I should say by just being so open-minded and curious, he sort of saves himself from this. But his project is no less doomed. And the project is the project of counter-revolution. I don't see how this occurs. No one ever talks about it because it obviously will never occur. I think that if there's any way forward, it's going to be in finding something that steers clear of the categories of fake, gay, cringe, and retarded. So much of what we have right now is either too stupid to do the thing it claims to do, too fake to be interesting, or falls into one of the many cope mechanisms we have. It's either cringe to the point where it's obviously being dishonest about what it will actually accomplish, or it's accomplishing negative. It's accomplishing less than nothing by appearing in the moment powerful by simply consuming and dissolving the fixtures of previously solid categories, the way our very own LGBTQ movement does right now. And again, it's not that I disagree with these movements. It's not that I disagree with progressivism. I certainly do. But I think what everyone's trying to experience right now is we've been conquered. Right? Obviously, we've lost the war. We're not making any progress, so on and so forth. But I don't feel like I've been conquered by Caesar. I don't feel like I've been conquered by a strong entity. I feel like I've been conquered by a bunch of incredibly weak people who are disintegrating before my very eyes. We've been conquered by a bunch of fake retards, to be crude about this. I mean, and that's sort of an impossible thing to process in your mind, because in order to accept the fact, it's like that line from Train Spotting, when the Scottish guys are talking and they're... I think one of them's kind of a straight arrow when he's talking about how they should have pride in themselves as Scotsmen. And was it the Jude Law character? I think he was the guy from Trainspotting. Or is it Ewan McGregor? I can't remember. It's Ewan McGregor, isn't it? Probably it's Ewan McGregor. But he says, you know, Scotsmen are terrible. I can't do the accent. I won't try. We always complain about the English being wankers, but we're the ones who are colonized by wankers. And that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. What makes it so painful is that we're surrendering to a force by any historical standards would be too weak to hold itself together under any other circumstances. Coming up with a narrative of how to process that is the challenge of our existences. To make the resistance to that something noble and something that can actually sustain itself is the task we have before us. That's not an easy task. The question everyone feels is they feel that they should be able to just push this thing over. They feel like they should be able, in all rights, to hurl this kind of tyranny to the ground. But in many ways, this type of weak tyranny exists because nothing else can exist to take it over. It knows that it's in charge because it has no rivals. Therefore, it seems like the kind of tyranny we're experiencing right now is the tyranny of the, and I remember this happened somewhere inside Greek history, it's the tyranny of the tyrant who castrates all young men, because he knows that one of those young men, if left to mature into full masculinity, will be stronger than he is. That's the tyranny that we labor under currently. It can't persist. But every time I hear some cringy right-winger tell me that they're on the cusp of victory, all they are doing is telling me that they're weaker than the wankers that have colonized us. Everyone who has a head on their shoulders and who's not suffering from some debilitating memory crisis and is living through a memento conservatism understands that everything that they said about taking on the progressive movement was true 10 years ago, it was true 20 years ago, it was true 30 years ago. Everyone knows this. So the LARP is coming to an end because it's just too cringe to go on. And furthermore, the cringe itself is really insulting to participate in. If I were to acknowledge myself as a John Doyle fan, and I mean as someone who appreciates his content, would I be saying anything about myself other than I'm an incredibly stupid person who has no understanding of history, who is totally enthralled to narratives that I'm not even really sure I understand? That's what the Zoomer LARPing as a 1950s breadwinner husband conjures for me. And I think it will increasingly conjure that for everyone because this method is not going anywhere. I probably should talk a little bit about the latest kind of fake and gay thing that's happened. And that's been the slow motion, well, I guess it's been a very slow motion disintegration of Catholic leadership. Now, I'm usually very, very hesitant to talk about the leadership of the Catholic Church because I think Garvin said something like this: you don't want to question, it's not my role to question people in a higher position of authority than I am. I, however, can point out obvious strategic blunders, I think, and obvious instances of cruelty and instances of outright heresy that occur inside the Catholic Church. And we've had a double whammy this last week. I don't know, probably for those who aren't Catholic haven't heard this, but Pope Francis really went out of his way this last, maybe it was the week after last, but he went out of his way to essentially sanction the Latin Mass. Now, I'm not a Latin Mass Catholic. I have very much appreciated the beauty of the Latin Mass when I've attended them. I really enjoy them. But we've always kind of been based Norvis Ordo. The parish we liked the most tended to be vernacular with a little bit of Latin mixed into the hymns and a little bit of Latin mixed in with the rest of the liturgy for things like the Agnus Dei and stuff like that, right? Lamb of God. But the move that Francis took was essentially this. He essentially gave bishops the permission, and in some case, with sort of a side order of, and you really should, ability to completely shut down Latin masses from occurring inside their own parishes. So if a priest in a diocese or a holy order has a parish, they can set aside a certain amount of time for a Latin mass to occur for people who want to participate in that. Not anymore. Now they essentially need the explicit cooperation of the bishops in order to hold these ceremonies. And the bishops, therefore, can hold these over the head of Latin Mass communities as sort of a carrot measure, or I should say perhaps as a stick. Don't interfere with us politically, or we're gonna take the mass you love away. This is one of, I mean, I hate to say this, but I really dread that the church is playing with some heresy here, not necessarily on the part of the Holy Father, but certainly on the part of the bishops who are lobbying for this. So there's this great movie, The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is it's a silent movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Actually, maybe my favorite movie of all time. It's a line by line reenactment of the trial of Joan of Arc. And it's literally taken from the trial transcripts. They wrote all this stuff down. And of course, the filmmakers take some imagistic leniency over some of the scenes. So it's not exactly realistic, but the lines are all accurate. And I remember watching this with one of my priest friends. And there is this scene where they literally try to bribe Joan. Don't call Joan of Arc. Joan, the Maid of Orleans. They tried to bribe her into recanting her visions and her political cause by saying, if you recant, if you tell a lie, we'll give you the Eucharist. Or if you agree with us politically, we'll give you the Eucharist. And if you don't, we'll take it away. And when the priest saw this, like, oh my God, people actually did this. This was a big no-no. Even in the 15th century, when Joan of Arc lived, it's always continuous. You're not supposed to use the liturgy, the Mass of the Church, as a carrot in a political game. And so the bishops are not doing this, but they're treading a little bit close. They're essentially, what obviously is going on is that the bishops in question, probably in New York and in areas like Boston and in areas like a lot of the places I've lived, they feel under pressure from their religiously conservative communities. They feel like they're being called out. They want them to shut up. And so they think that they can use the liturgy to twist their arm into a political obedience, which is like, it's treading towards one of the most disgusting heresies of trying to use the sacrament as a political tool. And it's doing this for the and for what? And people, non-Catholics are like, oh, whoa, what's the political issue that they feel so bashful about? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's some cultural war issue like abortion or gay marriage or anything like that, which of course is a problem to any kind of bishop who wants to rub shoulders with all of the bigwigs in any major metropolitan area. But leaving aside the culture war for a moment, maybe it's the sex abuse crisis we're dealing with that's going on inside not only the priest class of the Catholic Church, but inside the bishops themselves. Right after Pope Francis's announcement that there was this, I don't want to say it's political from the Holy Father's point of view, but frankly, this abeyance to a political desire on the part of some bishops in this country and in Western Europe. There is the immediate news that one of the prime directors of the U.S. College of Catholic Bishops was essentially conducting gay hookups, like on a nightly basis behind everyone's back. And these are the people who are essentially pressuring the Holy See into actually taking action to crack down on the believers in the church. I mean, it's, and of course, right after this scandal happened, the David French equivalents in the Catholic Church, probably worse than David French, the actual progressives, they go into their usual line. They go like, oh my God, the reason why this guy is going on Grindr and having like anonymous gay hookups all the time is because of the celibacy requirement in the priesthood. That's why. And if you only let them, I don't know, let them do what? Is it marry women now? Is that the thing? Probably not even that. Marry men. Marry underage men in many cases if you're giving into these bishops. If you only let them play out their urges, they wouldn't do it in secret. Sort of a cringe personality that I still do read is Rod Dreher. And then on his blog, just the other day, there was an article. He reads letters. The key rule about Rod Dreher is that the letters people write to him are always more interesting and more full of ideas than anything he writes about himself. That's neither here nor there. But there was this great letter. It was like this guy, this incel guy writes him, who's a faithful Catholic. I can't remember if this guy was married or not, but he had some physical debility, or his wife did, where they could no longer be physically intimate. And the guy is saying, like, I think maybe he's in his 20s, I think. He's a young guy, right? He's like, I'm in my 20s, raging hormones, all of that, and I'm being completely celibate and chaste according to the church's rules. And then people are telling me that 60-year-old bishops can't stop going on anonymous hookups with other men because their sexual urges, their sexual urges, I guess they're categorically different from the lay people's, but their sexual urges are just so much. They're just so much that they cannot be denied. Fake and gay. Fake and gay. And the people who apologize are cringe. That's all you can say about this. And not saying that the question is not, is this going to survive? There's no way that a church that takes this attitude is going to survive. It's going to shrink. The Catholic Church is absolutely going to shrink. It's going to shrink until all of these hanger-ons get flushed out, one way or the other. Either through the fact that Catholicism isn't lucrative anymore, it's a complete on-the-ground thing, or maybe it's because maybe it's because they just all die because most of the people who do this stuff are getting on in years. But a church like this will and is demonstrably shrinking. I used to think that the Catholic Church writ large was a base by which we could push back on the direction that society is going. I still in some sense, I still hold out that hope, but not really in the same way. John Paul II convinced me that, well, I guess he did convince me that the church actual is the church spiritual, aka that the physical Holy See is the representation of the church that Jesus talks about founding. But I think now that dream of John Paul II is sort of dying in me. I don't doubt that the church spiritual is going to be the thing that pushes back on our current cultural direction. But it's going to be from a splinter or a seed inside the church, not the church itself. At least not anytime soon. Hopefully that splinter or seed will conquer the Holy See. I think it will. But if Catholics or Christians here are thinking about our current situation, they shouldn't be looking to the church as a whole. They should be looking to the church as it is in some places, or as it exists in the heart of certain very special people. I've said to Franklin that the decline will begin when people actually have an alternative to believe in. And people will actually start believing in things when things get small enough so that truly genuine interactions and truly genuine pursuit of truth can begin again. This is such an uncomfortable truth, but we're in a period where this direction is going to have to burn itself out. I think we can discuss what we can do to survive this, but That's the situation we're in. We're in the situation where this process is played out in full. We get to the bottom of this process. I think it will come sooner rather than later, but who ultimately knows? No person can know the future. In the meantime, I think, what I'm looking for, and I said this to the Franklin again, I'll say it again. We'll know that we've crossed over. So there's going to be a night, and all of our lives, probably all of our parents' lives, although they did not yet realize it, our generation has the misfortune of being able to realize the direction we're going in. But as we're going into night, things are getting darker. We will reach the apex point of night when our anger stops growing and is over, well, not stops growing, but when our anger is overtaken with our desire and yearning. So we will notice that as our situation goes on, as society progresses, I think you'll notice this in yourself if you want to ask yourself this question. Has anyone noticed this, that you're getting less angry? Has anyone noticed this? I've noticed this in myself. I'm not less outraged in like an abstract sense. Like I'm not less outraged, but I've kind of come to terms with that this is how things are going. That this is just the way things are going to be. And that makes you less angry, but it also turns you into something of a seeker. Once the yearning for a new age exceeds our anger over losing the old, the night will be in the process of waning. That's how we know it. And this is something that I think that we actually can do. Everything that makes you angry, if it fascinates you, that's a different story. BreadTube fascinates me. They make me a little bit angry, but they fascinate me. Full disclosure. But anything that makes you angry, take a step away from that. And then try to take a step towards something that gives you joy. That feels like it's really exciting and new and interesting and promises a different world that's hopeful. That step, I think, manifestly takes us towards something that's spiritually ready for renewal. All these people who are trying to save the church right now, and I really do respect them, they're furious at all this stuff. They're furious at Pope Francis, and they're furious at the bishops, and either the ones that are apologizing for this rank heresy or the people who are doing it. And I kind of want to tell them to stop. I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to tell them, like, the people who you're raging against, they thrive on this. Why do you think that these types of bishops are promoted inside the Catholic hierarchy? Why do you think they are they're promoted? Because the current system, they enjoy seeing right-wingers being made angry, and they fear right-wingers. And the way they fear right-wingers is they say, well, I fear right-wingers, so if they're angry and triggered, if they're experiencing some obvious cope or delusion, then I know that I'm winning against them, and that makes me feel good. And whenever that's not happening, that makes me feel bad. So I'm going to promote bishops. I'm going to hire bishops that really give me this kind of dynamic with the rest of the traditional people. They make sure that the traditionalists are always on the losing side, always angry, and that makes me confident. That makes me confident that I, as a progressive, am on the winning side of history. They know what to do with angry reactionaries. They know what to do with hopeful and yearning people, post-progressives, who want a new world to begin, who just look at what they've created and go, that's fake, that's gay, that's cringe, that's retarded. Is there anything else other than this? Is there something new that comes after this? Yeah, that's. I don't think that there is really a solution to this that works in that way. Anyway, that's my spiel for tonight. So I'm going to move on to super chats if there are super chats. I turned off super chats and I turned on entropy. Ooh, there are a lot of entropy things. Um, I don't know what side to start on. So I also apologize. I don't have my face on the camera right now. So one reason is I actually literally packed my camera. I guess I could use my laptop camera. Um, but I haven't. All my grooming products are in boxes. So like I look. People tell me that I go from looking when I haven't shaved in a while and I haven't had a haircut. I look like some kind of like frizzly old like rabbi. And then when I get a haircut, I look like some kind of like Leave It to Beaver 1950s house dad, like the really clean cut, thing. Right now, I'm kind of, I definitely look kind of more like the frazzled rabbi kind of look here. Or maybe I should use, maybe the YouTube centers would prefer if I used Orthodox monk rather than rabbi. But I definitely am not looking very well kempt, not the least of which because I've just been packing boxes and doing housework when I haven't been working. Some people want the entropy link. I'll throw that in the description right now. Inside the YouTube chat, there it is. So yeah, another thing, guys, is I have decided to take my channel 100% nonprofit. I no longer feel like I'm in a position where I need the money, and I want. This partially sort of shields me from. This partially sort of makes me a more difficult target to come after from the progressive side, but I want to make it very, very clear that this is a passion project, and not something that I'm doing for money or cash. So, first of all, I guess I disabled super chats because I'm donating to the Don't Give Money to Google charity. I also don't monetize my videos anymore for the same reason. And I'm opening up Entropy because I really like that company. But more than that, whenever they give me a payment, I'm going to post a receipt to one or two charities that I like in my own real name. I guess I'm not so altruistic that I'm going to give to charity and not write it off on my taxes. Thanks. Right. But I will post a receipt with my name blanked out. So if people have any charities that they particularly like, I would prefer it if they were politically neutral. Things like Catholic charities are fine, or pro-life charities are fine, but nothing that's like explicitly lobbying or anything like that, right? So, I mean, if you have any suggestions for charities, I'd love to hear them. But whenever Entropy gives me a lump sum payment, I will pay that much into a designated charity. Hopefully, when my life settles down, I'll decide this charity before the stream. And okay, let's do this. I think that. Okay, wow. Yeah, this Entropy, there's one thing I don't like about Entropy is it's never clear how the super chats are being set up. So let's see, if I highlight this, will it go to OBS? Looks like it. So yes, by the way, guys, I am back to using Linux OBS. Supposedly it's been updated. So that means that I'm not going to be crashing suddenly. So I figure that sudo apt upgrade OBS Studio is enough to make sure that the problem I was having a month ago is not going to happen again. But I am very much at the mercy of OBS Linux's worse interface. So please be patient with me. Okay, so last thing says for a Entropy super chat. I won't read out the quantities Maybe I will read out the quantities. Is that a good idea? I guess if it's to charity, right? Okay, for US $3, last thing says, Dave, what's the next step on the extended universe, guy? Give me a sword and let me win this war for you. Also, you worship Gork and Work and therefore are an idolater. The Emperor will see you punished. Last thing, so he's giving me shit about my board game faction choice. Hey man, if I can't have an intergalactic soccer riot, then there's no real reason to play the game, right? Plus, it gives you the opportunity. In America, usually you get lynched if you try to do a phony baloney British accent. But among Warhammer players, trying to do a South London accent is outright encouraged if you play orcs. Okay, well, so what Last Things is talking about is that about a month and a half ago, I wrote sort of an extended exploration about how you could try to spontaneously create a collective fiction project. I wrote that because I'd started writing it and I needed to finish it. And I'm trying to focus on getting stuff out, getting things done. But I remember getting 75% done with the essay and turning to my wife and saying, you know what the worst thing about this essay is that when I publish this, I know for a fact that I'm not going to be done because everyone's going to be asking me, when are you going to start the project that you propose inside this letter? And I have no bandwidth to do that. Maybe I can revisit this in like 3 or 4 months when my life stabilizes a little bit, but I just don't have time to do it now. I've learned sort of, this is a little bit of something, is that I kind of, this is a bad habit among right-wingers, is that we tend to take on more than we can chew. I'm not so sure what the solution is. But there's so many projects that kind of come across your radar and you want to do all of them. And at least on the internet, that's not been very reliable. What happens is that a few people start something, and because we're all doing this part-time, because this is, not an income stream for my family, this is a passion project, you run out of time and then you stop doing it and then the project collapses, right? Or, in the case of many right-wing projects, the whole idea online is based around a certain social media profile or a certain cooperation of a social media platform. And then, presto, you're banned off that platform and your entire way of networking that thing, and you never realized how dependent you were on that platform, is just gone. So, I do really want to start that project. Another project that I had going for a long time that I really wanted to experiment with was some kind of Telegram or Odyssey radio station. Like a continuously streaming radio station. And people could send playlists or YouTube playlists to this thing, and then it would queue them up and play them on this station. So there had to be a lot of gatekeeping on that last part. But for instance, you could have like a 2-hour block dedicated to folk music, or a 2-hour block dedicated towards classical music, or something like that. Or you could have an entire 24/7 channel just for classical music, and people would send their particular playlists in. The important thing there would be a chat, and you could sort of try to build community around the chat in sort of the same way that people build community around places like Chill Cow. Is Chill Cow the guy that does those 24/7 like synthwave chill beats to study and relax to? I think that's the guy, right? Yeah, that's the guy. So yeah, I've always wanted to try that. I tried that a few times with this thing called Vox Mortis Radio, where I would have a bunch of old radio shows queued up with a bunch of old music, and the idea is that every person that you're hearing on this station, and it would run for about 6 hours, usually had about 6 hours of content, which is not hard to put together. But every person you hear on this channel is deceased, is dead. And so hearing this broadcast on YouTube is like hearing this broadcast from another time, right? It's like hearing old radio, and you get sort of this insight into this world that previously would never have existed. I always like to do something like that as well. But I really have to manage myself because I don't know. I have the time that I have, you know. We have to pick our battles. In some sense, I feel like setting up some minimalistic community online might be a prerequisite so I could hear people actually talk to me about this stuff. I really miss Discord in a lot of ways. And this is just the problem, right? With everything. Like discourse and Matrix. Matrix is obviously the superior system. But nobody uses it. And it's incredibly, it's insanely complicated. And the fact that the way the servers are organized is incredibly complicated. It's a hard interface to navigate. Or at least the element interface is hard to navigate. You subscribe to like 2 communities on Matrix, and it feels like you subscribe to 2,400, and it's impossible to figure out where the conversations are actually happening. So let's say that I get home from a hard day's work, and I just want to talk to people about politics and see what their ideas are. I think I was like part of about like 20 element communities. I had no idea like where people actually met and chatted about things. There didn't seem to be any community of people where they just hang out and chat about things. And as such, it wasn't really fit for a purpose. It was a really hard system to use. That's the whole issue with alt tech. So much of the utility of social media comes from the fact that everyone uses it. And once not everyone uses it, it's very, very, very difficult to find utility in it. I think Odyssey is sort of bucking the trend on this. Entropy, certainly for myself, is bucking the trend on it. For myself, entropy is exactly what I need. But I don't think it's, I don't know. I think it does have sort of a very niche application. And, okay. So here's the next one. So when it comes to, so this is for Nerve AMV Maker for $25. Thank you very much. When it comes to art, dissidents seem to excel at comedy. Professional comedians have nothing on decentralized internet meme humor. This skill, however, hasn't translated to any other type of art such as tragedy or romance. Why is that? Is it that it lacks a positive vision, or do those works require more intuitional support? Well, pardon me, Nerve AMV Maker. I think the question, I would kind of rephrase this. What right-wing internet culture has mastered is they've mastered a certain kind of very, very low energy culture, right? This is sort of, when you say that they've done comedy well, I think there's like one, right? Is Bill Burr count as right-wing stand-up comedy? Because most of the stand-up comics I know who are very popular, they're all left-wing. And so and uniformly are all of the comedy writers, as bad as comedy is these days. So when we talk about the right-wing mastering comedy, we're not talking about it mastering, high comedy or highly produced comedy. We're talking about it mastering low-energy comedy. The right wing thrives in the meme spheres because you can't ban memes easily, and memes are very, very low energy to participate in to consume. Another low energy thing to participate in to consume is streaming. The left is terrified of streaming. They understand its power. But right now, nobody has found a way to stream, to be a streamer on a major platform and to be a right winger. Obviously, the quintessential person who tried this, well, I guess before Nick Fuentes, it was Andy Worski and JF Gariepi. But that is only to demonstrate, and Ethan Ralph, right? That is only to demonstrate that this method is totally off limits for right-wingers. The stream allows the censors to comb through all of your comments and find one or two impromptu things that you said. For instance, if I were a streamer and the establishment was paranoid about me, I'm sure they'd comb through this conversation and they'd they'd hear me saying something bad about gay, right? And they'd call that a homophobic slur. Even though obviously what I'm talking about is a type of spiritual effeminacy and not people with the homosexual sexual orientation. Although there's some relationship, very arguably, as I specified earlier, they'd clip that and they'd ban me, right? If they were worried. I mean, like, what did Nick Fuentes get banned for? I think it was a Cookie Monster Holocaust joke. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Millennial Woes did this project where he compiled all of Vosh's, hate speech. I mean, the guy is like a wall-to-wall, politically incorrect, toxic masculinity engine. He never gets banned, right? The only thing that happens is they ban right-wingers because they're afraid that some message will get through that isn't fake or gay. So when you talk about the right succeeding, so it's very, very obvious that in the present day, low energy culture is king. Streaming, memes, Twitter arguments, etc., etc., etc. I'm kind of a medium energy, low energy in comparison to other art, but higher energy when you compare it to, or medium energy when you compare it to other YouTubers at least, right? The reason why you can't do tragedy or romance in these right-wing spaces is that tragedy and romance don't have low energy versions that would be very good. And it seems, at least for when it comes to sort of artsy, cringe performance art, the way that ContraPoints does it, it seems that the left likes that more than the right does. So I don't know if I can call Friended my friend. I guess I should. I think he calls me his friend. I consider Friended a friend. That sounded weird. But Adam Friended, what was it, 2 years ago? When ContraPoints was really at their height, he did this little skit called Social Justice Detective, which is really cute, and it was really well produced, and it was a lot of effort went into this skit. And I can tell, like, he put a lot of time into making this good. But of course, like, it wasn't studio. He obviously didn't have a script editor. He didn't have a professional comedian writing the jokes. So it came off like a ContraPoints video, kind of cringe, a lot of winking at the camera, inside jokes. You have to kind of be on board. You have to kind of be on board with the cringy element of it in order to really appreciate what it is. The thing did not really do well for him, as far as I can tell. Far from being like a ContraPoints video that has got millions and millions and millions and millions of views. It was more or less a flash in the pan because right-wing content creators, they didn't want an elaborate performance art. They wanted people to tell them that they weren't insane. And being kind of a little cringy but a little cool at the same time, that doesn't convince people that you're not crazy. It convinces it's just a weird thing on the internet. And as good or as bad as that thing is, that's not what a right-wing audience wants. To come up with, the kind of tragedy or romance that would really light a right-winger's soul on fire, that would require a level of energy and production that we really can't muster. The best thing we can do is find right-wing messages inside pre-existing things that exist. I kind of find that very productive, is to put right-wing meaning on otherwise mainstream political content. I can't remember the most recent one that this was. I think the most recent one I remember doing this was the movie Midsummer. So this is one of those horror movies. I remember this was a few years back because I remember Millennial was really hating that movie. And but I remember watching the movie and saying, this kind of plays like a right-wing parable. Because if you follow the course of the plot of Midsummer, and I'm trying not to include any spoilers for this. I guess it's not a spoiler alert saying that it discusses a bunch of Westerners, going to an isolated pagan community and discovering that it's really nefarious. And if you're thinking Wicker Man, you're probably on the right track here, right? But I remember saying to my wife, well, I can't help but read this as a right-wing parable, because what this communicates to me is these characters' lives are so empty and so fake that but it seems that almost that the movie is saying that this murderous pagan cult is somehow more authentic than their old lives. And I think it's little things like that, right? Profound meanings that creep their way into mainstream art. That's probably the way that you're going to get tragedy and romance if you're a right-winger. Romance might be harder, given that they can smell that a mile away. Follow-up Nerve AMV Maker. I guess I find it much lower for comments but in the high-effort stuff. Yeah, I mean, Nerve AMV Maker mentions Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Yeah, I mean, that's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is like Trailer Park Boys. That's cringe comedy, right? I always kind of like that comedy. I don't know. Okay, nope. I hope I didn't miss one. Why am I deleting these things? I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, I'm looking for the super chats here. Okay, so hopefully this one's highlighting now. I think this is the next one. If I missed one, I hope Entropy does not somehow eliminate super chats, because it seemed like for a minute there they went out of order. But I'm assuming that this is the next super chat in order, so let's answer this one. Okay, Zood for $5 US. I watched a video about Bliss, the old Windows XP background. I thought it was just an empty corporate art, but on inspection I found it was deeply beautiful. In the future, what do you think they'll find beautiful once it's freed from corporate contexts? That's really hard to say, isn't it? God, I feel like I need to have a good answer to this one, because that's a really good question. I feel like something's going to dawn on me probably about an hour after this live stream ends, but I do believe I have seen things that are beautiful that occur in corporate art. The problem is that recent corporations have just been so on the nose political that it's just been really, really, really fake. Anything that's, I mean, unless it's ironic, right? I don't know. I'm sorry, Zood, but I'm going to have to think about that a little more before I answer it. I'm going to go on. I think, see, Last Things has another super chat that's appeared twice. Okay, next one. I will think about that one, Zood, and I'll try to answer by the end of the stream if I can think of anything. Aristocratic Owl for $10 USA. With the military career path destroyed by the left, no longer fills... With the military career path destroyed by the left, it no longer fills the purpose of training great men. What are ways distant right-wingers could train themselves to become aristocrats worthy of ruling the state? I mean, this is tough. I mean, I think the only other way I can think of is that this is going to have to be independent organizations of men. I hesitate to say this because the reason why I hesitate to say this is because the most common organization that trains young men and these kind of values is organized crime. And I definitely don't recommend people go out and join organized crime in any way, shape, or form. I guess there's a third way in the fact that there's a religious vocation, or maybe there could be religious organizations that try to train men physically and not train them through a vocational life of contemplation, but rather towards a married life. That would actually be interesting, wouldn't it? What if the Catholic, and again, I'm going to the Catholic Church, but what if some saint started a quasi-religious order that focused on training young men towards, for the early part of their life, in religious devotion, doing physical things, I don't know, maybe it could be something like creating farms or, restoring towns or something like that. I'm just speaking off the cuff here. But the whole idea was that it was be preparing them for a life of marriage and family and career. That's a little bit LARPy, but something like that perhaps? Certainly anything like this could not be based on the internet, right? If we go down the line here, no kind of training for young men could be based on the internet. Or at least none that I can see. The question is, would young men seek this out? It's so frustrating because the US government is the problem when it comes right down to it. Because there is demand for manliness. It's just that there's no demand from Western governments, and they'll perceive anything like this as a threat. So anything that occurs like this has to hide in plain sight, or it has to somehow cooperate with another power that can push back against the United States government, which in its current iteration doesn't seem to be possible. I don't know. I mean, if one of these state governors was really pissed off, I mean, that's actually something that would be really interesting. What would happen if Florida or these states just started training their own militias? I mean, like, follow me here, right? What if they had like a work program? So the whole idea is we're going to create a works program for young men, and it's going to train them in military disciplines. And then after they complete this works programs, they're going to be kind of like an army reserve for our state. They could even make it ideological if they wanted to. I don't even know that's necessarily illegal, right? Because none of the protected categories of the 14th Amendment have anything to do with ideology. And then sort of use this as a work program, as something to base political power around. I don't know. I mean, this is sort of like the Huey Long plan, right? This sounds very 1930s the way I laid it out there. There's certainly nothing, on paper at least, doesn't seem like there's anything stopping our current leaders from doing anything like that. I'm sure it's more complicated. But we'd have to see. What time is it? It is it 10:30 here? Okay. Wow, time flies. Okay. I hope that answered your question. I guess the two things are, I mean, it's going to be some kind of paramilitary organization. It's either going to come from organized crime, which is really bad, a private scouting troop, which probably will have to be religious in some sense, and will have to have spiritual vocations. You could also call this a cult, or it could come from some kind of alternative government, shadow government, or sub-government, that either being some kind of foreign power, some kind of state power, or some shadow fraction of federal power that wanted to have this as a contingency. Other than that, I think you're out of luck for replacements for the military. I don't think that you're going to ever train intellectuals to be leaders or Caesars of the kind you're talking about. Because the intellectual life is the exact opposite of that. The intellectual life, you're constantly second-guessing yourself. You're constantly, going autistically into all of the details. Whereas in a leadership role, you need to be a generalist. You need to have good instincts. You need to act in the moment. Aristocratic Owl for $5. Let me highlight this. Aristocratic Owl for another $5 chat. It seems Yarvin answer is creating your own business or learn how to be a Gordon Ramsay of politics. Well, that Gordon Ramsay of politics is who is the Gordon Ramsay of politics? Curtis Yarvin's idea is that it is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. This is one place that I this is one reason why I'm trying to get past Yarvin in a big way. I'm trying to kind of go back to the roots of of Catholic thinkers. Because when it comes to, I mean, you want a priest caste, right? You either want a priest caste or you want a warrior caste. And you're going to intellectuals to get priests and warrior. No, you're not going to intellectuals. You're going to merchant class. You're saying, okay, I don't have any good priests. I don't have any good warriors. So in a pinch, someone from the merchant class will help me because my merchant class is really competent. But the problem is that merchant values, which are noble in their own way, are nothing like warrior or priest values. They can't possibly be that thing. Everything you learn from a human resources department, and all modern CEOs are trained by their human resources department, is the exact opposite instinct you should have as a proper monarch. It tells them to constantly devolve power to lower bureaucracies, or else. And almost all modern CEOs respect that. That's just not going to work. I'm sorry, I mean, we're just going to have to decline until people literally invent microcosmic warrior castes and microcosmic priest castes. Society is going to have to shrink until the people who want these things are close enough together and strong enough to actually build this stuff in some way, shape, or form and create a demand for it that actually is meaningful. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit fast because I might run out of energy soon. Nerve AMV maker for US $10. It seems that the establishment right exists to manage the left more than the right. Yes, definitely. And I think that it was Orrin McIntyre that said that. Oh, by the way, before I forget, everyone should subscribe to Last Thing's channel. It's an excellent channel. Oh, he made a series of really good videos quite recently, I thought. I think I discovered them a few days ago, and I haven't finished them yet. Otherwise, I probably would have shared them on, I say social media, but I really mean Telegram, because I don't use Twitter anymore. Oh, God, it's just terrible. Not having Twitter is so limiting. But the thing is psychologically poisonous. You know, I don't even have the good excuse of being banned off of it, you know? I don't even have that good excuse. I literally just deleted my account. And I'm really glad I did, but I'm not saying it doesn't hurt me when it comes to reach and ability to communicate with other creators. Okay, pardon me, not to interrupt your chat, Nerve. It seems that the establishment right exists to manage the left more than the right. If no Republican Party existed, the population risks ODing on progressivism and having an extreme reaction against it. The Republican Party puts the brakes on too much leftism too fast, but never reverses its gains. I think this is sort of the hope. I think that sort of the hope is that people understand that the Republican Party is a joke party, which it is, and they start focusing on good governance again. I suppose, though, I mean, are we really underestimating the amount of fakeness that's in our modern society? Because, I mean, bear with me here, right? I mean, the logic is, sorry, I keep on dropping this stupid thing. The logic is of this, we're going to burn out on progressivism, right? So I'm saying something like Vosh, right? And I'm thinking to myself, or you could replace this with Xander Hall or Demon Mama, any of these cringe and fake leftist streamers. I see them and I'm thinking, man, if I were in their audience, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm making fun of Republicans because Republicans are in power, because Trump is president. But when Trump's not president, then you know what can I really say, right? Like, it'll be transparent that all I'm doing is just an act of masturbation. All I'm doing is this cringe gay kind of voyeurism where we take people who have relatively no power and make fun of them endlessly so I can feel smart. But am I really smart if I'm not focused on power? That's how I would react to that. But I don't think these people are participating in politics the same way we are. To them, the fact that Republicans are powerless, weak, and a joke is actually part of the utility. If you make fun of weak people, you know they're never going to hit you back. So in some sense, the audience of Vosh like the fact that they're picking on the weaker party. They don't want to criticize the mainstream. I mean, of course, they criticize, quote unquote, the mainstream Democratic Party. They criticize them for not being left wing enough, but they don't make any serious, they don't actually insult in a way that hurts. They don't actually attack them in any meaningful way. They attack them less than people like myself attack David French, because they're hoping that that's their career advancement, or at least the creators do. Ultimately, the audience knows that the Republicans are weak, but that's the whole fun of the thing. They're attacking somebody who can't attack back. They're picking on people who can't attack back. They're not. When we go on, we want progressivism pushed back on. When I click on a Lotus Eaters video, right? Guilty pleasure. I like Sargon's Lotus Eater channel, right? I know nothing's a revelation. It's more geared towards a normie audience. Nothing wrong with that, right? I think people need to produce normie content of some type, right? But I do click on his videos and watch them sometimes as a guilty pleasure when I'm unwinding. What am I looking for? I'm looking for someone to tell me that I'm not insane, that reasonable people can see how crazy the world is and have a similar reaction than I do, right? And Sargon's very good at it, because Sargon's very much the everyman. He's very much the middle case. He's very much like his audience, and that's the product. Vosh's audience does not want to be assured of the fact that they're sane. They want to pick on weaker parties. They're more or less participating in the fun of going to a freak show and laughing at the freaks, or the pure sadism of seeing somebody humiliated when you read gossip magazines, right? There are humans are sadistic creatures, right? We like it when people are brought low and are hurting. Especially if the person who's being brought low looks or feels like somebody who may have picked on you in high school. I think most of the people who participate in left-wing politics feel in some ways that they weren't as popular as they should have been in high school. And so the sadistic dimension of politics works very well for them, because the right wing is a proxy for those people who they felt were more popular than they were. How long can this go on? I'm not really so sure, because, wasn't New Atheism a thing? New Atheism exclusively ran on the fuel of making fun of old Christian churches who were already in decline. I don't know. I think that what's going to happen is, and this is what Angela Nagel said, the real telling thing, the real interesting thing is, when intelligent people get bored. Most of us have bad experiences in high school. Most people who are reasonably intelligent and attractive and resourceful, and I really use reasonable because I don't think that I'm incredibly any one of those things. I'm pretty normal, right? But anyone who's not definitively lacking in one of those qualities, resourcefulness, attraction, or intelligence, we kind of get over high school a little bit, right? Right? Like, you kind of get over high school. And when you get over high school, you realize, like, okay, now I'm interested in actually seeing something that represents a future that I can believe in. That's the type of people that the right wing should be attracting, or trying to attract. The Angela Nagel types, the Mark Fisher types. The types for which people like Vosh and even Mama do not appeal. They're the ones that are going to burn out on progressivism, and are in danger of burning out on progressivism due to the Biden administration. Glenn Greenwald's another good example. Arch progressive. I hesitate to say that Andrew Sullivan is one of these people, even though he kind of is. But I mean, he's a person, and he's done more damage to this society than any single person I can think of by his work on gay marriage and promoting that. But he's also a reasonably intelligent and resourceful person. So he gets bored with this stuff, right? He sees the Biden administration misbehaving and then trying to blame all of its problems on some mythological Nazi threat. Like we're in imminent danger of getting taken over by the Blues Brother neo-Nazis. That's the greatest existential threat to America, is white supremacy. With everything we have, crime, inflation, an increasingly growing government, I hesitate to say the virus, because I'm not even so sure how imminent that problem is at this stage, and how much of it's propaganda. With all of those problems, it's the Blues Brother neo-Nazis that are the biggest deal. Nobody in that group of intellectuals is going to take that seriously, and eventually they're going to start saying, okay, I'm bored of this. I want to hear a story about a future that I can actually believe in. All right, moving on. So from Beyond Gate for US $3, what do you think of America First by Nick Fuentes? Well, okay, I mean, it's pretty simple. People ask me this every single time. I admire Nick for sticking his neck out farther than I ever stuck my neck out, and being edgier than I ever was, and for being a better organizer than I ever was. I suck at organizing. Well, part of it was that a baby came, somewhere in the time when I was trying to organize these things, and that disrupted everything. But that's a poor excuse, right? But he's better at all of those things than I am. The problem is I just don't like his style. I don't like his how he comes off, how he presents himself. It really grates on my nerves. I know he's super smart, and a lot of people like watching his show, and that's great. He's been banned off of everything. I don't know. I feel like I'm copying someone when I said that. This is a criticism someone else made, not me. When they criticized Nick Fuentes by saying he's not cozy. The aesthetic at this stage of any right-wing movement has to be one of coziness, of feeling like you're fundamentally healthy and not like you're fighting like a wild animal for a minuscule amount of political power. I think even Nick would admit that. But and I say this not really watching his show. I don't know. He doesn't seem to be suited for, I admire his bravery. I admire his intelligence. But in my reading of the situation, his approach to mainstreaming right ideas is entirely unsuited for the time we live in. There's not going to be another Rush Limbaugh. We have to focus on a post-leftist project. We have to focus on being interesting to the people who get bored with what the left has become. Okay, so feature bug for US $3. What do you think about Jonathan Pageau and the symbolic lens of looking at the world as following meaningful narratives as opposed to interaction of random events? Well, I don't know. I think Jonathan Pageau is I really like the guy. Actually, he's kind of the anti-Nick J. Fuentes. Jonathan Pageau is all cozy and no bite, and Nick is all bite and no cozy. I think in that statement, unless it's somehow sharpened, it appears that Pageau is kind of beating a dead horse. Human beings are incapable of seeing the universe as random events, right? You see this in, what is that paradox called in statistics, where people are given the probability of Oh man, I'm forgetting now. It's the probability of it's the probability of A or the probability of A and B, right? So it stands to reason in probability that the probability of an event A happening is always going to be greater than the probability of A and B happening because of the fact that A and B indicates an intersection of events and therefore has to be smaller in the probability space. But it turns out that if A and B are both part of a narrative, people will evaluate that as higher probability. So here's a question: what's more probable? The probability that Jane got lung cancer at the age of 27, okay, or the probability that Jane got lung cancer at the age of 27, and the probability that Jane is a smoker. The probability is higher that Jane got cancer at the age of 27. But everyone else will evaluate the statement Jane got cancer at 27 and was a smoker because that tells a story. Oh, I see, because she got cancer because she was a smoker. Therefore, that's more probable. Human beings are very, very bad at perceiving events as unrelated. That's one of the reasons why we're so bad at math as a species, is because our brains are constantly trying to make connections that aren't actually there. And those distract us from the ones that actually are. I think when Jonathan Pajau talks about the symbolic world, he's just talking about human language in a real way. In a way that it seems that modern Hollywood has really completely forgotten about. So in that sense, I find him a useful resource. I mean, he's a useful resource in the same way that I was talking about previously. Insofar as it's just as much our job to find right-wing narratives in existent media as it is to create new media, taking a symbolic lens. So I should say this. It's obvious that the people who actually produce movies and video game, maybe video games less so, movies and books, they've lost the eye that Jonathan Pajau has for narratives governing our life, and essentially being a fundamental way of how humans view the universe, and not simply a false way. I think a lot of people will understand that human beings are symbol-making creatures, but they'll have a crass and materialistic understanding of this, something more akin to Marx, where this is just sort of a false conscious veneer over a solid material world. But this is not how humans perceive the world at all. And so unless you have a symbolic view of the world that in some sense is real, you can't make actually sincere, entertaining media. So Hollywood is going to make sincere media, is going to make media. A lot of it's going to seem fake. A lot of it's going to seem retarded, gay, and cringe, right? But the stuff that's genuinely good is going to be probably accidentally good, and it's going to contain a symbolic thread in it. With that symbolic thread and that authenticity, we can transform those media pieces into our pieces. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. I got to get going, otherwise I'm never going to answer these questions by the time As a matter of fact, I'm going to pause briefly and fill my water up. Otherwise my voice is going to go. I'll be right back. My water cup is never large enough for these 3-hour streams. Hopefully I am back now. Okay. I already answered that one by Zood. Although admittedly I didn't have a good answer for it. Good corporate art. I mean, I was always a fan of the flat aesthetic. although that has gone from being edgy to being kind of overdone, so maybe not so much anymore. I mean, to be quite honest, I always liked the green screen text. I always loved the command line. But that's not really corporate art from the modern world. That's the corporate art. That's corporate computer aesthetics from the 1980s. Narco Republican for US dollars. Mandatory donation to torment the Super Chat Puritan. All right. Thank you very much. I don't have to answer that one. But thank you very much, Narco Republican. I appreciate it. It will go to some charity, although we haven't decided. Oh, man. I'm going to really date myself by saying that I liked... I really liked... oh, why isn't this one? Super Chat's not selected. Is that because the Super Chats don't select if they're on Google? Well, I was going to say before that is I'm going to really date myself if I say I remember the show not Curb Your Enthusiasm, Arrested Development, right? And in Arrested Development, they are combating this disease called TBD. Because they couldn't decide on the disease to fight with their charity ball, so they just said to be decided. So now their charity ball, like in sort of an autonomous move, has created this imaginary disease called TBD. And so the organizers were like, finally, we can bring an end to TBD with your support. Okay, so I can't highlight this for some reason. I'm not so sure why. But Jan for USA $10 says, I tried using anti-white in a couple of online discussions. It wasn't like I instantly won the argument, but it was clear that I was on an even footing instead of losing one. And it made my opponent uninterested in continuing because I was clear that they didn't have an automatic win. Yeah, anti-white... As I always say, I don't really put a big emphasis on race, but I'm anti-white. And to me, that's sort of a very minimalistic framing. Being anti-white does sort of maximize your dialectic power against the progressive, because against at least white progressives, right? Against at least white progressives, they have two options. The first option is to deny anything is actually anti-white, which is the typical go-to for the boomer progressive, is to pretend like you're being self-pitying, is to pretend like you're just making all of this up, and it's basically a scoff at it, right? And there's this whole thing, reverse racism. Back in the 1990s, a bunch of people like Rush Limbaugh complained about reverse racism, talking about very real discrimination in the form of affirmative action. For the next 20 years, the left used reverse racism to mean basically racism that's imaginary, trivial, and fake. And God love the enlightened centrists of 1997 and of 2005. They totally bought the leftist explanation of this. When they heard reverse racism, they couldn't help but snark, well, reverse racism doesn't exist because racism against whites is just racism. Not realizing that they were in fact agreeing with the very pursed people that they were making fun of in that very statement. But because the left had media dominance in that time, they were able to brilliantly reverse, or not to make a double entendre there, but they're brilliantly able to co-opt reverse racism and turn it into a claim that a certain racism is fake. And to this day, whenever somebody on the left wants to discredit something, they say it's reverse something. Because, of course, the left's been trained to trigger on the fact, as all humans are, we're trained to trigger our moral instincts on words, not on actuality. The second they call something reverse something, that means that it's not real. Anti-white's a stronger position because the left has, in some instances, they've embraced the term anti-white. They explicitly said that they're against whiteness. So unlike in the 1990s reverse racism spiel, it's much, much harder for them to deny that at least what you're talking about isn't imaginary. They'll still try to deny it. I wonder if this race stuff gets louder, if they won't try to, if they won't have to abandon this altogether. Because the only alternative to denying that anti-whiteness exists is to simply abandon the white progressive dream of having race not matter. And I mean, in that way, it's very, very powerful because it sort of splits the narrative in two. And that's essentially why, the one good meme the alt-right actually was able to mainstream was "It's okay to be white" for very much the same issue, right? Defending your own community is almost never cringe. If someone's actually attacking you and actually declaring themselves anti-white, it's perfectly fine to be anti-white. If someone's declaring themselves anti-Christian, it's perfectly fine to be anti-Christian. As a Christian, you have to be pro-Christian, which is another story. But anyone can rest assured that as long as you hear an attack on your community, I would say you always defend your community, as long as it's understood that you're reacting in defense. It would be a dark day indeed when the left can properly stigmatize anti-whiteness. So I would feel very safe using that formulation, Jan, not to put too fine a point on it. My God, Mycroft Homes for $75 US. Well, I hope it's a good charity people pick. Do you want, Mycroft, do you want to tell me where to give this money to? Give me a suggestion so that when I get the payment from Entropy, it can go to a charity of your choice. When are we going to see Pope Dave? Well, I am not a priest. I am married. And although I've heard that it's not impossible for a layperson to become elected pope, it has been literally, or rather unprecedented, that any layperson has been elected pope. So that's a little bit of a problem. I have no vocation for the priesthood. Oh, pardon me, I'm yawning. Although it would be really fun to reenact that scene from The Young Pope. I'm pretty sure that if I'm not elected pope, any future-based pope, maybe I'm not the right person for this, but if you wanted to give a speech for that, I would be very happy to write him one. If you wanted to sort of flip the bird towards the legacy of Pope Francis, that would be really good. I am very worried about the Holy See, and just the issue is just that progressives are always more organized. Progressive bishops vote progressive more than conservative bishops vote conservative. And as such, I feel that there's this tendency to always flirt with heresy. I really pray that God preserves his church in that way. I don't think that the church can fall into heresy, but I do feel that the church can devolve into incoherency. By which I mean that the church becomes an incoherent group of cardinals all saying different things at different times and is totally unified against itself. In somewhat similar but qualitatively different way than you saw in like the Avignon papacy, where there were literally two popes excommunicating each other. Okay, so Sam 15. But thank you very much, Mycroft Holmes. I wish I had a better answer for that very generous super chat. Sam 153 for US $25. Great thoughts on the current times, Dave, and it's always good to hear your takes. I can definitely agree with the feeling of being less angry over the past half year. Have you listened to the American Mind podcast by the Claremont Institute? I think you get a lot from the roundtable. Oh, yeah, were you the one who recommended it? Because based on the super chat last time, I just started listening to it. I'm quite fond of Michael Anton. He's really convinced me to try to pick up Leo Strauss again. I think I really did not benefit from trying to read Leo Strauss, 10 years ago when I picked it up. And if I had more time, I probably would try to read that. But yeah, very good recommendation. The American Mind and the Claremont Institute are definitely things that fill me with some amount of hope. That people are really ready for something that's brand new. Okay, select this thing. Why does it do this? Oh, I know. Is it because the chat clears and it no longer... Oh, it's a mystery. Okay, I don't know. For some reason, I've stopped the ability to highlight these things on... But anyway, yeah, it's a great podcast. Oh, it looked like it worked there for a minute there. All right, well, it's a mystery. Is this Linux OBS giving me problems again? I'll have to just read it aloud. All right, well, my thoughts on the American Mind podcast are it's a good podcast. I really wonder where they're going to go with it. I think the great challenge for American right-wing media right now is who their audience is, right? Because, I mean, who, as a right-winger, who are you talking to? You're in some sense, you're not talking to the Republican Party. You're not talking to, I mean, in a great, right now, you're not talking to any kind of intellectual class that's able to enact policies that you're talking about. You're just talking to a bunch of dissatisfied people who largely don't wield any cultural power. So that's a big issue for people like the American Mind, because it feels very difficult to move forward on anything. I guess what I would recommend is try to keep on playing to this dissatisfied intellectual class and see if that goes anywhere. I wonder if it does. Anyway, so Lumpy SJ. I'm going to click this again. Hopefully that'll appear on the screen now. Lumpy SJ. Have you ever read Robert Filner's Patriarcha? No, I have not read Robert Filner's Patriarcha. I'd be interested in hearing about that. Maybe I should type that in. Patriarcha. Okay, it was The Natural Power of Kings, a 1680 book by English philosopher defending the divine right of kings, on the basis that all modern states' authority is derived from biblical patriarchs. Well, yes, I think that would be a really interesting read, but I guess I don't know. I mean, 1680, the difficulty with 1680 is that it's so early that you're not answering any of the big critics of natural law. All of the big critics of natural law and the Enlightenment, from Hume to people like Locke or whatever, these people all happened after 1680. So you're hearing arguments before you hear the known counter arguments. I don't know. It's hard for me to really wrap my mind around that. I think I would have an interesting time reading it as a historical text. It's the year that it was written, and it's really tough, right? Because it's after the 80 Years' War. So I don't know. I guess it would have a hard time competing with a lot of stuff like the Leviathan or a lot of stuff from the early Enlightenment. But thank you very much for the super chat, Lumpy SJ. Okay, so Bob Ob for $10. I found another way of countering Bolsheviks, historical reasoning. It's clear from the historical record that, if not for the Tsar getting involved in World War I, then communism would be a footnote in history. The advent of the USSR was obviously not a result of materialist inevitability, but an accident. I don't know. I mean, I think that would be a gotcha to a 19th century Marxist who took what Karl Marx said about determinism seriously. I can't even imagine, though. I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, Bob, but I can't imagine a modern Marxist who would take that criticism to heart. I don't think any modern Marxist even cares about history. I don't even think many modern Marxists care about the consistency of the labor theory of value. I think Keith Woods did yeoman's work on the labor theory of value across the last few weeks. He had a whole series about criticizing Marxism from a right-wing socialist perspective, and he did a devastating takedown of labor theory of value. In addition to sort of the standard normicon ones, it appears that even in Marx's text, he wasn't consistent about his definition. I mean, I guess this should be apparent because Marxists themselves aren't consistent about the labor theory of value. They switch it around all the time. I kind of disagree with you, though, Bob, that if if World War I hadn't happened, then communism would be a footnote in history. I disagree. So there were a number of monarchies in the early 20th century that were still chugging along. All of these monarchies had communist dissidents in them, and they did not yet have the modern Republican information control system that sort of became the answer to communism in the later half of the 20th century. There was an enormous number of money just waiting for one of these monarchies to fall so that it could be replaced by communism. That money was not coming from Russia, was coming from America. So I don't know. I mean, if it wasn't Russia, it probably would have been. It could have been Germany, right? It could have been Germany. It could have been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It might even have been Turkey. Those all would have been candidates for a revolution. It wouldn't have been France or Britain. But probably much the same thing would have happened. There's a double super chat from Bob, so I'm going to skip over this. Is that the end of the super chats? I hesitate to say, but it looks like it. Okay, well, I guess I will post my Telegram link. People were storming it last time, but God, sometimes Telegram really is just not a great system. It's like all alternative media, out of the frying pan into the fire, you know? So I'll post this in the chat if you want it. All right. I don't see any more super chats. So I guess I'll go on. How much more time do I want to go on for? I'll probably go on. At least until the end of the hour. That sounds about right. So wait, it's 11. It's 11:20. Oh, I should probably head out. I should probably head out a bit sooner than that. I probably will take about 10 more minutes. If I missed any super chats, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just try to answer at replies as I want to do. So I'll probably end it a little early. This is not really an official Distan stream. Although I guess it kind of was because I did give a talk at the beginning, didn't I? Maybe I'll turn this into a Distance. Maybe I'll do that stupid thing where it's like, as opposed to going from 2 to 3, you go from 2 to 2.5. Someone says, the American dream, as is known, is all gone now. The meat has all been eaten to the bones. There's only one meal left, the bone marrow. We get the marrow. I guess we do, but what does that actually mean when you translate it out of the analogy? It's clear in America right now that the number one goal of any kind of post-liberal force is to explain the existence of political representation by groups that are not represented under the current victim hierarchy that our center-left actually wants to talk about. This is going to involve You see, a lot of people like Scott Alexander think that this is going to evolve or return to class politics. And I think that Keith Woods is thinking in the same way. In my thinking, it really can't evolve out of class politics. Because what the right is really lacking right now is not an army of working class people. What the right is lacking really now is an army of intellectual people that want a new vision of the future. That's where the revolution, or that's where the change has to occur. That's where the change has to begin, not in the working class. And so, yeah, in many ways, I see the instigating element to be more cultural. For instance, and this is a video that I've long talked about, making a discussion of really the right's own belief in diversity. Why is cultural homogenization cultural impoverishment? Everyone knows that cultural homogenization is, in some sense, cultural impoverishment. But no one on the right seriously talks about it. No one really takes that seriously. But inside that is a vision of a new world order that can appeal to many different races and many different peoples. That's more fresh and more accurate than what the left is currently offering. An endless discussion about victim groups. I don't know. Let's see if there's any out replies down here. Now's your chance to ask a free question. Do you think evolution and Catholicism are compatible? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't know. I think that the existence of natural selection doesn't seem to be particularly incompatible with Catholicism. Under my understanding, people knew about genetic selection for a very long time. I think what you probably mean is the natural history of evolution and its, and the development of mankind, and that conflicting with narratives of man being in the form of God. I've always been of the school that this is not as much of a conflict as people make it. I'm kind of in the company of G.K. Chesterton here, thinking that this is not as big of a deal as people make it. It's also kind of a boring discussion. I mean, I don't know about you, but I used to follow the atheist versus theist debates over stuff like evolution back in 2016. I've heard theist explanations for evolution. I've heard atheist refutations of theism based on the fact that we evolved from, or that based on the idea that we evolved from lower beings. I thought it was boring in 2006, and it sure as hell is boring now. I don't even see how. I mean, it's not that it's a. If you want to sit up and talk about that with experts, that's fine. But I don't see how, like, discussing evolution versus Catholicism or Christianity, how does that result in another better idea coming down the line? How does that germinate forward and make us better in any way? Someone's asking me if I'm Hegelian. Well, I mean, I've read one book by Hegel. It was Reason and History. I read it a long time ago, and then I read it again, and I didn't understand any of it either time. I read a summary of Hegel's works after that twice. I felt like I understood that. I'll say this about Hegel. First of all, I'm not so sure anyone really understands what he said, because I've literally been to philosophy groups where two academics who both had PhDs in Hegel both claimed that the other person's interpretation was 180 degrees wrong. So, I mean, I don't know. Hegel can't really be anything that's... It's sort of music of the spheres. But I will say this. Hegelianism is accused of proposing sort of a rather deterministic pattern of idealism, right? So Hegel describes the evolution of ideas being in thesis versus counter-thesis. Actually, I think someone told me that original idea came from another one of the German idealists, like Fichte or Schelling or whatever. I don't know who originally invented it, but it's the one most popularized by Hegel's phenomenology, right? This is kind of laughably inaccurate when it comes to understanding history in the way that I usually talk about it. So I'll say no in that regard. But I have found the pattern of synthesis, thesis, antithesis coming together in synthesis, I have found that to be a very, very useful analogy when it's come to political organizing principles, right? Because when you think about it, politics is always binary because there's the power and then there's eventually everyone who's against that power, right? So politics almost always diverges into binaries. And then what happens is that one side ultimately wins and takes the front, and then a new different binary develops next to it. And then part of the people who were left over from the previous distinction that are outside of the intersection, they have to be merged with the previous ideas in some way that makes both ideas work. I don't know if that's what Hegel was talking about with his idea of dialectic idealism in history. But if I use that sort of more Machiavellian interpretation of Hegel, I can absolutely get behind that as a phenomenon, right? Because politics is always binary and the binaries shift. That means in the newly formed political coalitions, the narrative has to be massaged into a synthesis between previously disagreeing parties. By that Machiavellian analysis, Hegelianism seems like it does have some kind of physical analogy, even though every Hegelian's going to tell me that that's not what Hegel really meant. Yeah, okay. Race politics has replaced gender politics. What comes next? Has race politics replaced gender politics? It's true that race politics has replaced feminism, but gender politics when it comes to transgenderism certainly has gone nowhere. So I don't know. I mean, everything burns, and the left just grabs the closest thing that burns the brightest. Another question. TLM hang strong. Retreat to the caves. You Novus Ordo bros got our backs. Well, I certainly am in support of my TLM friends. I guess I moved so many times that I'm kind of in contact with these people. I used to have tons of people who were friends that were Latin Mass aficionados. They were great people. They were very devout. Sometimes there's a little bit of purity spiraling in that community. I'm not going to lie. There's some purity spiraling, but I think what was done was atrocious. That's just, I don't know really how to explain it very well. Anglican the Black. What are some differences, if any, in where right-wingers should focus their effort? Why don't I read this on Super Chat? Wait, did someone donate to? Oh, that's the total. I see. Okay, sorry about that. I lost my train of thought. What to do about Pope Francis making moves to purge the trads? Ignore him. I mean, ignore the decrees to the extent that you can, is what my statement is. Just proceed. I mean, and if your bishop wants to shut down the mass you appreciate, get him on record. I'm not sure about this, but I do believe that you can celebrate Latin Mass outside of church property. That's an option for you to celebrate the Mass in the extraordinary form, which I do believe you have a right to. First of all, you absolutely have the right to the Mass if you are confessed. You have the right to the sacrament. Don't let a vindictive bishop stop you, and if they are really that vindictive, get them on record, because that will clarify things. What I mean by the bone marrow, we are the last generation that can be somewhat satiated. We won't get to have our fill, but we won't quite starve. We're the last. Yeah, I think millennials really are the last. In terms of if being satiated, you mean having a reasonably probable chance of living out a middle-class existence. Differences between right wing and left wings in blue or red areas. This is a tough one. I really don't think you should. I think you should think about it. If you're in a blue area, your role is to be a post-leftist. You shouldn't even call yourself right-wing. Just be a post-leftist. Find the people, especially right-wingers, especially traditionalists, but also disaffected secularists and disaffected leftists who don't like the direction that the progressive movement is taking. Those are your people. Build from there. If you're in a red community, build deep. Go to deep traditions, deep entities. And I'm going to write an article about this. If you're in a red community, seriously, give the patriotism a rest. The federal government is not your friend. Moreover, the use of the federal government's symbols or the use of nationalist symbols, if they're not tightly linked to an ethnicity, and that's a big caveat, that actually gives the national government power over you in a lot of ways. It means that you're still loyal even after everything that's been done to you. Yeah, I see someone saying about the Yarvin's fascination with startups. Yeah, Yarvin has the fundamental cause and effect reversed. He thinks that because when Silicon Valley companies started in the 1990s, they were Promethean and exciting. That means that by making something like Silicon Valley, you will make something Promethean and exciting. The problem is that when companies start up these days in Silicon Valley, they're not Promethean and exciting. They already have an HR department. They're actually, I have only seen one startup, but they've struck me as very, very, it's kind of, sometimes some of them are kind of plotting, to be quite honest. So the energy that Curtis has intrinsically linked with the Silicon Valley company, it was a reaction to a certain time and place when the Silicon Valley company was the messenger of the Promethean energy. That doesn't seem to be true anymore. So in essence, Curtis has fallen prey to the very type of cargo cult thinking that he's usually want to criticize other people of. He should be looking for new things that might have this Promethean frenetic energy, not trying to copy the things that had that energy in the 1990s. That energy is all used up. It's gone. And furthermore, it wasn't even the kind of thing that could fill the role that Moldbug wanted it to fill. I don't think that military castes can really grow out of the environment we're in, but priest castes can. Military castes grow out of conflict, which means that, unfortunately, things need to get a lot worse before you can even attempt to build some kind of military leadership in that capacity. Outside of some kind of foreign interference or literally the construction of militias and mercenary groups, which is borderline illegal, even though it technically is legal. But I think it has to come from the instinct of the priest class. That's why I put so much emphasis on the post-leftism of the disaffected intelligentsia, the Angela Nagels of the world. Anyway, guys, I am really tired, and I have one more super chat from Bob Obb for $10. I'll answer this one and then I'll end the stream. I also see a friend asking me for a wrench. Is that true? Maybe I'm back on that. I don't know. I should give more people wrenches. But the problem, friends, is I'm not reading the Google chat. I'm reading the entropy chat. So I don't know. At any rate, Bob for $10 says, I'm not sure I agree about other states falling to communism, but my point is that Marxist historiography is horrendously bad and limited. Fronting historical perspectives on them in argument makes them incredibly uncomfortable, as does all communists who all tend to read other communists. I mean, you're absolutely right, Bob. I don't think modern communists care about history. What serious student of history would be a communist. I mean, it was. As far as I'm concerned, the last serious Marxist historian probably died in like 1945. Since Stalin, it's been impossible to take an orthodox view of Marxist historiography, which is why most modern Marxists treat his view of history as a footnote to his larger economic points. But at any rate, my voice is completely dead. So I will say to everyone, thank you very much for joining me on this stream. I hope to be doing more of these streams and get back into my regular swing of things. But anyway, thank you with your patience. Everyone have a wonderful week and a blessed night.